Moving is fun, because I'm currently filming this while sitting on a step stool. Hi everybody, my name is Maddie and welcome back to my channel, or thanks for joining us if you're new here. Yes, I am in the process of moving. My life is a little all over the place right now. So because of that, I won't have like the physical books with me, even though I own physical books for most of these, because you can kind of tell there's no bookshelves in my room right now because I need to go paint the new one that I just got. So all of my books are in stacks all over random rooms of this house. So it's not worth the effort to try and take them all up, but I will be flashing up the titles and the covers like I usually do throughout the video. All right, let's get started because I read a lot in April because I basically finished my degree and then was still at my place at school, trying not to deal with the existential crisis that is graduating and not knowing what I'm doing with my life. And so I read a shit ton of books to deal with that, on top of it being the Orillium first semester that I had a whole bunch of books that I needed to do reading challenges for that. So the very first book that I read was The Last House on Needless Street, and this is by Catriona Ward. So this book follows essentially a young girl has gone missing and is believed to be murdered years before, but then you're kind of trying to piece together whether what the main character's role in this was and like what actually happened. So it's very much like listed as being like a horror, thriller, and mystery. And it's really hard to talk about this book because of like the twist and not wanting to spoil the twist, but also so many of my thoughts with this book have to do with the twist, particularly the main character and the way that this book navigates DID, or dissociative identity disorder, which is often used as a very unhealthy and stigmatizing trope in horror, and the ways that this book tries to challenge it, but unfortunately because of the ways that it has to be marketed in order to be picked up by horror readers, then it ends up kind of perpetuating some of the stereotypes that it's seeking to challenge. There was a lot going on in this book, and there was points where I was like getting really frustrated with the mental health portrayal and being like, all right, I'm done. I've read too many of these books with like shitty mental illness portrayal that are like, if you're mentally ill, then you're a serial killer or a terrible person, or there's something like horribly wrong with you. But I'm really glad that I stuck with it because it came around at the end. I would be super curious to hear thoughts from other people about this, and maybe I'll do a full spoiler review if that's something that people are interested in, because I think there's a lot to dive into with this book, but it's really hard to talk about without spoiling the book. After that, I read A Perfect Gentle Night, which is a book that I read in middle school that I remember really loving, and I went back to reread it as part of the Orillium Readathon. And this book follows the 5 Bell children all coping after their mother's deaths. It's set in BC in the 1950s. It's seen through the perspective of the middle child, whose name is Corey. And I think this book does a lot about the relationship between grief and neglect, and how their father is, you know, not intentionally neglecting them, but I think that he's so lost in his own grief that he doesn't have the capacities to parent. And the ways that the children are kind of dealing with their grief is the oldest brother, Sebastian, has kind of come up with this like Knights of the Round Table, and it's a place where, you know, they get to be the Knights of the Round Table, and it's a place away from the realities of the world, but that line between what is fantasy and what isn't is really blurring for him. And I think that was the thing that I remember really liking Sebastian when I first read it, and rereading it I was like frustrated about how little of Sebastian we got because we were seeing the book through Corey's eyes. And particularly as, you know, Sebastian's mental health deteriorates, that he tries to get help and kind of get to the other side of it. There's so much of that journey that we don't see, and because of that, like, the story feels really unsatisfying in its conclusion. But I did still like mostly enjoy it for a reread. I'm always nervous rereading things that I haven't read for years, especially if they're like kind of that like 12 to 15 era before like the teen era. I find sometimes those books don't hold up as well when you reread them, but this one did okay. After that, I read The Last High, which is by Daniel Calla, and I was nervous about this book because this is a thriller that is set in Vancouver in the like context of the opioid epidemic, which is still ongoing. And basically there's a new drug on the street that is killing people, like, and it's pretty much, they find out it's like pure carfentanil, and this Vancouver ER doctor and the detective are working together to try and figure out what happened and get this deadly drug off the streets. I was really worried that it was going to be missing a lot of the like nuances of the epidemic itself, that it was going to be this, woohoo, we got this drug off the street, now everything's magically better. Like the whole reason we need to decriminalize drugs is because you can't prosecute them. Like you're never going to be able to catch them all the dealers, all the people who are making it. Like there's all these nuances. I think I have a whole video about the opioid crisis that I will just link up there because otherwise I'm going to get into it. And knowing that this book was written by a Vancouver doctor, I was really hoping that it was going to have some of that nuance. And I was a little bit nervous at the beginning, and it actually came together really well in the end with kind of this, you know, sense of hopelessness. So you feel like you're doing something good, but isn't really going to change anything when somebody else is just going to take that person's place the next day. The writing wasn't 100%, but I did really appreciate the way that this book was a thriller, but like also being a very vulnerable critique of, hey, we're failing to help these people who really need our help and who are dying every day within our country. Next, I read Tender is the Flesh, which is one of the few 5-star books that I have read this year. And this book takes place in a dystopia where animals have contracted some sort of illness that makes them unable to be eaten by humans. And as a result, cannibalism has become legalized. As a result, there's like factory farming cannibalism, essentially, like people who aren't really people, they're just like they're considered head or product. And we follow this man who is dealing with the death of his son and his wife being away from him as a result of her dealing with her grief. And he is kind of like the overseer or manager of one of these big factories because he kind of got into the business because his dad used to run a like factory farm when animals were still able to be eaten. I do want to acknowledge, I think this is one of the grossest books I have ever read, just in terms of, you know, they get into the technicalities and everything of how this would work and a lot of the, you know, just eating people aspects of it. But also the fact that like all of those technicalities are really fleshed out is what makes this book so fascinating, because it really looks at the way that it's like, would we just give into it? Like, you know, would we accept it if we change the language, if it's sold to us in this way, like kind of the atrocities that we're willing to blindside ourselves to in like the name of bureaucracy, essentially. And I thought that was like a really interesting critique, and because the author fleshes that out so much, you know, so much of that stuff that's just become paperwork, and like how can we, you know, make these people into paperwork and forget our common humanity is really well done. So I would highly recommend checking that book out. The next book that I read was another one for the Orillium Reading Challenge, and this was Someone Who Will Love You in All of Your Damaged Glory, which is by Raphael Bob Waxberg, who I believe was one of the creators or showrunners of BoJack Horseman. So this is a collection of short stories that all deal with kind of the idea of love. And one of the things that I really loved about this book is it didn't just look at love through like an amatonormative, romantic, sexual kind of lens. It really explored all sorts of different facets of love. So there was love within like families, there was like sibling relationships, there was relationships between owners and their pets. There's like a whole story that's told from the perspective of a dog that was really great. And I was so grateful for the way that the book like dealt with all of that, but also with the way that like love and relationships become really messy. There's this story where, you know, this young teenager is like trying to get to know her half-brother for the first time, and like understanding that his relationship with their parents is different, and like how that complicates her own understanding of family, but like also this tenuous relationship with someone that she feels like she's supposed to have a connection with. So there's definitely a lot that all of the different stories explore throughout this book. I think with any short story collection, there's always some stories that are going to resonate with you more than others, but I have to say this was like a really solid collection where I think there was a few stories that I was like completely out to lunch on, but for like the most part I was really engaged in all of them. After that I read Hawkeye, and this is by Matt Fraction with the art done by David Aja, might be saying that wrong. And this is the Saga of Barton and Bishop. So this is the Hawkeye run that went from 2012 to 2016, and it includes like all of the issues, the collected editions 1 to 4. I loved this. I do have to say, There's a lot of drama with Disney stealing shit from people, and I am curious because Matt Fraction worked on the show, but David Aja didn't, and they like stole a whole bunch of his art. So I'm like, yeah, they used some of the storylines from it, which I guess at least Matt Fraction was writing on it to give that approval, but like, why didn't he say anything about them stealing all of the artwork? I don't know, it's a whole thing. But the whole thing about this series is it really deals with like what's happening when it's not like Avengers level threat, you know, like dealing with aliens and all of that nonsense. What's Hawkeye doing in his spare time? And that's the part of like superheroes that I really love, is like, okay, let's look at how like human they are. Let's look at like the messy, gritty nonsense that they get up to in their spare time, and like the community that Hawkeye builds in this book through like buying a building, and all like the neighbors and the people that he lives with who want to like protect him. Very much gave me that like scene on the subway in Spider-Man 2 vibes, and that's the like Tobey Maguire Spider-Man that I'm talking about, you know, where like even though he's a hero, they're all willing to like look out and protect one another, which was something that was really done well. And also this comic deals with Clint losing his hearing, and there's kind of this whole issue that's done so well in the sense that like you don't understand what's going on, but it's because you're supposed to be experiencing it from Clint's point of view. So like all the speech bubbles are empty, and his brother is using sign language, but the signs aren't translated. So I thought that was a really interesting way of trying to have people understand what like the deaf and hard of hearing community go through, and to be able to illustrate that experience on the page, and like the exploration of deafness in comics, which is not something that I think I have seen done, and it's something that the show was trying to do. Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like there's been a lot more representation recently between, you know, Coda and Hawkeye, and I can't remember the name of the like character in Hawkeye who's gonna get a spin-off, and there's a character in Turtles as well who uses sign language. So I think that's really cool to be able to know that there's going to be a lot more representation out there for people to see themselves represented on screen and in literature, which is amazing. After this, I read To Paradise by Hanya Yanagihara, and this follows 3 different stories about different groups of people who share some similar names. The first one takes place in the 19th century, I believe it's the 1800s, in this portion of the US that has kind of become the free states. It's separated from the rest of the country, and they're actually quite progressive in some of their thinking. Like gay marriage is something that's very common in this community, and we follow David, who is trying to find love and believe that he is worthy of love. In the second one, we follow another David. Instead, we're in the, I think it's the 80s, like the height of the AIDS crisis, and his relationship with a much older man, as well as his reflections on his relationship with his father and his life growing up in Hawaii. And then we move forward to, I think it's 2097, where we're in a future that has been marred by a series of pandemics, and follow Charles and Charlie, and basically them trying to understand the past of this dystopia and like how it came to be, but also like looking towards the future and what her future is going to look like beyond that. So it's all about, you know, this kind of idea of paradise and where are we going towards. I did hope that the 3 stories were going to connect a little bit better, and I do think the first story resonated with me the most, then the third, and then the second. Just that like whole theme of this person really, really wanting to believe that they are worthy of love, and that they found someone who's gonna love them even when everyone around them is like, this is not what's happening. Just sucker punched the gut. It's a very long book, but Hanya Yanagihara does it again with her incredible writing style and just pulling you in. I do appreciate that it was a lot less sad than A Little Life, because I don't think I could have handled it. I read it with a friend because I was mostly terrified of that happening, but that was also a really great experience to have somebody to be able to talk to about all of it, and a lot of the nuance and conversations that happen that I won't get into here because this video is already getting long, but maybe I will do a full review to cover some more of those things. I feel like I say after that or and then I read too much, but I can't find something else to say, so I guess the next book is The Witch Boy, and this is the first book in a series by Molly Knox Ostertag. I believe I have said that right. And this follows Aster, and he belongs to a family where The men are shapeshifters and the women are witches, but he's more interested in learning witchcraft than he is about learning about shapeshifting. And after some of the men of his family start disappearing, he believes that this is his opportunity to prove himself as a witch and worthy of learning all of the spellcraft and everything that goes with it. It was really well done and a really interesting book. I have heard people describe Aster as a trans character, but that wasn't something that was like explicitly explored in this book. I know there's 2 more in the series, so maybe that's something that they delve into more, because this book was like mostly dealing with, it felt more like that gender norm idea that it's like I can do what the women are doing, but I do think there is something to be explored about Aster and the way that Aster understands himself. So I will have to see what happens when I read the next 2 books. All right. Damn, I read a lot and this is a lot of talking. Next, I read a webcomic, which is The Eagle and the Snake by Angel Tovar. And this follows Abel, and after Abel's father is killed and his younger brother is stolen, he has to pull off these heists to like make enough money to get his brother out of being held hostage. So he's kind of living this dual life on his own of being an MMA fighter and then doing these heists on the side. But all of a sudden this woman enters his life who is also trying to flee from the cartel and a life of crime, and he's trying to figure out, you know, do I save her or do I essentially like throw her to the wolves in order to protect this family that I've been trying to save for years? And you know, where do I put my priorities and what is the right thing to do? It was a really cool webcomic. Particularly I like the design for the heists because they all wear these like skeleton masks with an animal on top, and then that's kind of like their code name that they use for each other, which is really interesting and well done. I'm curious to see where the rest of the webcomic goes, and I will probably do a full review of this one once I get back into doing my webcomic Wednesdays. Okay, how many more do we got? 3. We got 3 more. So, third last book. So this is Ever After, which is by F.T. Lukens. In this book, we follow Eric, who is like the chosen one and has just killed the big bad and has now found himself king of a kingdom that he did not really want to be in charge to, with kind of his group of friends, including his best friend, who is a mage, Matt. Suddenly, he finds out that he has until his 18th birthday to get married, otherwise he's going to fade away. That's just, you know, fine print of being the king of this kingdom, and decides that he is going to try and woo one of his friends into liking him, despite the fact that he has a huge crush on Matt and Matt has a huge crush on him, but they're very oblivious of that. It's like rom-com vibes, but also like D&D type like universe, if that makes any sense whatsoever. I was worried it was going to be too cheesy for me, but I think after a lot of heavy reading this month, it was that like really good fluff that I needed. So I would definitely recommend checking this book out. Yeah, just very wholesome and a lot of, okay, these two are gonna set up a date with Eric for somebody else, but then of course somehow him and Matt are gonna end up doing whatever they were supposed to do on the date, and like trying to predict how that was gonna happen was a lot of fun throughout the course of the book. I also just like fairy tales, so I think that's always cool. And this is funny because I didn't realize this until I was talking to a friend about what I was reading, but I read, so this is Ever After, and then I read And They Lived, and They Lived comes from like And They Lived Happily Ever After. So very much fairy tale vibes at the end of the month. This is Stephen Salvatore's second book. I love them, their writing is incredible. It follows Chase Arthur, who's a budding animator and hopeless romantic, and then he is going to his dream school for animation, but he's also trying to deal with his gender identity and his body dysmorphia that has led to the development of an eating disorder that he's in recovery from. There he meets Jack Reed, who's a poet who worships words, and they start to build, you know, a relationship with each other, but Jack comes from this close-knit conservative family in like a small town and is dealing with a lot of internalized homophobia and like trying to understand his own sexuality, and things get wild as they're both trying to learn to love and like also to like love and be enough for themselves as well at the same time. Ugh. I can't like heap enough praise onto Stephen Salvatore's writing. One, just the like genderqueer experience is so hard to find written on page. Being able to read this and can't take this away just sucker punch to the heart. I tried to read this in one reading and I got so emotionally drained that I had to take a break because I was just sobbing constantly. They have a way of like putting these things that like I thought only I felt into words and articulating it in a way that I didn't think that other people would understand or know about. It's a really sex positive book, and it, you know, looks at this whole idea of like fat phobia within society and the way that parents internalize that behavior within their children, and, you know, exploring and understanding identity, and like understanding identity in relation to yourself and not in the way that society wants you to understand it. But it's also a love story, and it's got everything. You gotta read this. I think this is probably one of, if not my favorite book that I have read so far this year. Absolutely adored it. I picked it for like a little bonus quest in the Orillium Readathon that was like, pick a book that you think is gonna make you cry. And I was like 5 pages in already sobbing, and I'm like, wow. Yep. I was like extra emotional because of graduating, so just all the right mixtures in the soup to just sob. That was a weird way to describe that. All right, last one. The last one is Saga 58, and I feel like we're really getting back into it now. So at this point, Alana has left Hazel on the ship and is, you know, doing her own exploration of things, and Hazel is kind of growing up on the ship, and we're really getting an idea of more of this new cast of characters that has come in during like the hiatus and the time jump, but also an idea of where the story is going moving forward with the reappearance of some favorite characters. I think this has been my favorite issue since Saga has returned, and that's mostly because of like the seeds of things to come, you know, like that foreshadowing that like makes you terrified but like also really excited and impatient, and like trying to balance all of that. So that's something that is exciting, that there is more of that coming my way. And it's also just really cool to be reading this as it's released, which is not how I read the first 54 issues. So that's really cool to get to like interact and engage with people right when they come out. People are reading it for the first time. That is everything that I've read. I'm reading The Shadow in the Wind right now, which was my last book for the Orillium Readathon, and I can't decide if I'm going to DNF it or not, because the author, he has to describe like every woman's breasts way too much. It's a lot, and it's not conducive to the plot in any way. I just want to know about the mystery. I don't need all this weird romance that's forced in, so we'll see if I get through that. Stay tuned for that. I am going to bring Webcomic Wednesdays back before the end of this month. That is the goal. It is just a matter of getting my room to a state where I have a better filming studio and I have all of my books and shit back in one place would be amazing. As well, because I am redoing my room, I'm going to be doing a bit of an unhaul of some of my books and a reorganization of my bookshelf, so I will probably do a vlog style video, either 1 or 2, kind of going through that process. So yeah, lots of content, lots of things happening. Still don't know what's going on, but we're figuring it out. I am also thinking about restructuring this channel a little bit because I would like to make some more bullet journal content, and I don't know if people want to see that on this channel or if they would prefer that this channel is reserved specifically just for books and literature. So if you have any thoughts on that, please just drop a comment down below. Otherwise, I will see you all in the next video. In the meantime, you can follow me on Storygraph or my art Instagram, which are in the description down below. And until the next video, stay kind.